Views and opinions expressed on this podcast is solely of the creator and may not necessarily reflect the views, thoughts, or opinions of the listener. Listener and viewer discretion is advised. Chat GPTs and AI technologies were not used or harmed in the creation of this podcast. This is Under the Moon Paranormal Presents Ohio Legends. So this is the podcast that explores the Buckeyes State's most haunting and fascinating stories. I'm your host, Melanie. Hey, hi, hello. And today we're venturing into the heart of Fairfield County, where a long-abandoned institution holds secrets and stories that will chill you to your bone. The Fairfield County Infirmary, a place where the poor, the elderly, and the forgotten were left to fade away. But the infirmary's dark past and the eerie tales that surround it have cemented this place into Ohio's folklore. So join me as we delve into the shadows of this abandoned asylum where the lines between reality and the paranormal blur. We'll explore the history of the infirmary, the legends that have grown up around it, and the terrifying tales of those who have dared to venture inside. So I'm going to give you 5 facts about Fairfield County Infirmary. But before we get to that, of course, we're going to do a full moon update. So the full moon occurs on April 12th. That is my birthday. All right. When the sun in Aries forms this opposition to the Libra moon, it is a time of culmination and the promise of fulfillment of something begun at the new moon. So remember when I told you to set goals and manifest stuff on the new moon? Always do that because this is a milestone full moon, okay? It's heightened emotions, romance, fertilization, relationship dramas, and epiphanies are a theme. So you're going to have good epiphanies. The Aries-Libra polarity is a relationship axis where Aries represents self and Libra represents the other. Where Aries is about self-assertion, Libra is about compromise. With the Libra moon, we're especially aware of our need for relationships and all that comes with maintaining them. Compromising, negotiating, graciousness, and balancing. The Aries sun, on the other hand, is self-assertive, leading, and personally courageous. This full moon urges us to strike a balance between meeting our personal needs and attending to the needs of a significant other, and between independence or autonomy, the dependence of companionability. The Libra moon is diplomatic, equally focused, and fair-minded. The Aries sun values authenticity over the fact and is energized by independent efforts. The full moon illuminates this conflict. So, this phase of the moon occurs at 23 degrees and 20 minutes of Libra. So, these signs that are going to be affected are, of course, Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. Okay? So, pay attention to if you're in a relationship at this time. Love yourself, but also love your partner. So, the Fairfield County Infirmary. The best way to describe the Fairfield County Infirmary is it is a place for the unwanted. After the state of Ohio decided that each county should have a centralized home for its poor and indigent, the county poor farms, or infirmaries as they would like to call them, were set up by taking these poor unfortunate souls out of private homes and into a more group setting. Before 1828, when the Fairfield County Infirmary was built, overseers of the poor set up those less fortunate in private homes, awarding a contract of sorts to the lowest bidder, which is kind of weird. The caretaker offered space and their supposed loving care for small stripping to cover the paupers' food, medical care, and other necessities. As you can imagine, there was probably plenty of room for abuse in this system back at that time. Unfortunately, the solution was not perfect. The original infirmary building was quickly found to be too small, so additions were made in the 1840s. Again, right after the Civil War, during those years of expansion, a multitude of outbuildings were constructed and the property boundaries were extended to accommodate a pretty self-sufficient county farm. But as beautiful as the brick building appeared, and as productive as the farm seemed, things inside were not great by any means, especially in the early days. Throughout much of the infirmary's history, it truly was a place where unwanted could be unceremoniously dumped for a variety of reasons. If you could not take care of yourself for any reason, whether it be due to poverty, sickness, injury, old age, mental illness, or deficiency, being a widow could get you sent here, or even simply being a transient coming through town with little to nothing in your pocket. You could easily find yourself taken to the infirmary and remaining there for the rest of your life, and possibly you might stay in the afterlife too. Although attempts were made at some segregation, women and men had separated wings up until a separate orphanage was built in 1886. So, I'm going to break down a little timeline for you guys of the Fairfield County Poorhouse, all right? So, also known as Fairfield County Infirmary now. They used to call it the poorhouse. And the later, it's called Clarence E. Miller Building. And the large brick structure served residents of Fairfield County for 170 years until it closed in 2013. So 170 years of all kinds of stuff that happened here. So let's go through a little timeline I got set up here on these notes over here. Got my glasses on because, this is the last year in my 30s. I'm definitely an elder lady now. So, starting in 1828, the township officers called overseers of the poor. So, we went through a little bit of that. 1840, over time the building could not keep up, so the large brick building was built in its place. So, let's go on. 1865, the building expanded on again, and outbuildings were constructed for laundries, more tenant housing, storage, and farming. A farm across the road from the infirmary grew livestock and crops for the people that lived there. So we're going to break into the 1900s here. By 1917, the farm brought in a total of $4,300 from the sale of crops and livestock. Natural gas lines were run to provide lighting and heat, so they got some heat in the place now. 8,857 feet of pipe were laid to provide water for the infirmary. So they got running water in about 100 years after it opened. So 1958, the infirmary finally had some electricity. In 1903, a population reached its record population of 82 tenants by 1903. That was supposedly max capacity. In 1924, a crazed inmate attacked the infirmary's superintendent, striking him in the head with a bar he was using to stack hay with. So this was an accident that happened in the barn. In a field across the street, fellow inmates helped the superintendent while the other staff captured the inmate. So put a little boop. In 1929, March 22nd, 73-year-old Jane Householder opened a gas stove and caught her clothing on fire. 2 attendants smothered the flames with rugs. A doctor was called to come and care for her, but she died 9 hours later. We'll put a little that's actually a sad story. Can you imagine being 73 years old, living in a poorhouse, and your dress catches on fire? Oh my. She was buried behind the infirmary in the Pauper Cemetery, which we have a picture of that headstone right here, which used for those that had not been claimed by family or poor or other reasons. There's a little pauper cemetery out there. In 1960, the population of the residents began to slowly decrease over the last 30 years, and the farmland across the street was sold to the Ohio University. 1985, May, the facility closed, and its last 16 patients were sent to nursing homes or other mental health facilities. In 1986, the building was remodeled, becoming the Health County Department for the next 27 years. A sprinkler system enclosed in stairwells, emergency lighting, and a fire alarm were added to the building that is now the Clarence E. Miller Building, after the former congressman. In 2011, the building had bad mold, crumbling walls, loose bricks, and other concerns. The old infirmary needed an estimated $4 million to reconstruct it. In 2013, the health department leaves the facility, laid vacant sits. 2016, there were several bids on the property, but all were rejected by the county commissioners. In 2018, the property was finally purchased by Habitat for Humanity. They hoped to use it for Halloween events and even bought the American Horror Story buses. You can see the authentic Twisty the Clown bus from from the freak show. In 2019, Destination Fear came and filmed an episode. In 2020, February, the building was purchased from Habitat Humanity by Adam Kimmel with a view of turning it into a full-time tourist attraction. In 2020 March, after years of extensive restoration, the infirmary was nominated to be part of the National Register of Historical Places. So, a quick review, okay? I hope you're still following along. The inmates, as they were called in the 19th century, were admitted for multiple reasons, like we were talking about being a widow, old age, just crazy reasons. The majority of the burials at the Pauper Cemetery are unmarked, and only a few headstones still stand to this day, but they're working on restoring the cemetery out there too. There are a variety of events made life at there tolerable. There are a variety of events there while this was in operation that made their lives tolerable, so it wasn't, always insanely not great conditions. They kept morale up, these inmates did, such as when county officials visited, they were come and eat dinner with the inmates. Christmas gifts were donated by local Lancaster residents, and here's a little quote from Lancaster Eagle Gazette, an article in 1927. So the quote is, "Pathetic figures who have no longer any connection with the outside world," unquote. Yeah, the townsfolk didn't really see these people as people, and it's really sad if you think about it. So ice cream socials were also held here. Local bands and orchestras played, and there was many events to help soothe the residents at Fairfield. Abuse claims of residents began chaining up, places in holding cells, and beaten by the superintendent. So all of that can spark some paranormal activity, of course. Moving on. So just another little recap of the turn of the century from, 1800 to 1900. And as more of the social programs began to help the less fortunate, improvements seemed to be happening. So as you saw in the timeline, I broke it down for you. It did get better right there at the end because they knew a lot more about mental illnesses and all what they didn't know about in the 1800s. Okay. So the reports of the abuse of the negligent superintendents, ranging from nearly the beginning of the institution's operation. It was worse in the 1800s, is from what I've been gathering off my research. Yeah, so most of them, the causes of death in the Pauper Cemetery, besides for the lady accidentally catching on fire, inmates were elderly, and reports of accidents, unalivings, and even violence were not unheard of. The Fairfield County Infirmary's operation until 1985, when the remaining patients were finally put into nursing cares and mental health facilities. But then once it turned into the Clarence E. Miller building, and made some structural changes to meet fire codes. So it ran as a health department for 27 years. But the people that would come into the health department with their kids had a lot of paranormal experiences going on. So thus started all the ghost stories. The workers at the health department, the workers began noticing strange sounds like footsteps and voices coming from unoccupied areas of the building. Objects would be moved around, phones from empty buildings would ring in other offices, and apparitions were seen. By 2011, it was pretty much apparent that the old building needed some major upgrades. So in 2013, the health department had moved out, with the old farm across the road being sold decades before to the local university. Especially after it was discovered the on-site cemetery far exceeded its distinguished boundaries, and that there was probably bodies buried across the entire property. Okay? For one reason, Habitat for Humanity ran a haunted house attraction. Wouldn't that stir up some stuff too? Tell me in the comments what you think. Would having a haunted house attraction be cool for the ghost, or would the ghost be offended? If I was a ghost, I would think it would be pretty cool. I'd be trying to scare people. And they're like, man, that was a really scary attraction. Well, we didn't put that part in. It was a ghost. So, Adam Kimmel is an interesting story that Kimmel was told there was another investor vying for the property and he was tempted to put in quite a high bid. However, a ghostly little child from the property told him that there was no other bidders. Okay? And thus he won the Fairfield County Infirmary with a low ball offer. It is now ran a year-round mecca for paranormal researchers and ghost hunters like myself by Kimmel and his partner who own several more properties around the Midwest for the same purpose, to give a voice to the voiceless and restore their home. With literally hundreds of investigation teams pouring into the Fairfield County Infirmary since the 2020. So when Project Fear came in 19, right before, it was the last season of their show before they went to YouTube, this place got a lot of interest in it. The activity experience does tend to fluctuate quite a bit, but there are some hauntings that are told as canon. In addition to the general activity of footsteps and disembodied voices, there have been reports of apparitions of doctor figures and several older women wearing white gowns. Children are heard laughing and running in an area now set up as a boys' playroom. Shadow figures are constant, with shadowy beings darting in and out of the rooms, down dark halls, and even a 7-foot-tall shadow seen in the attic area. People have been scratched or bruised, and some have felt extremely ill in some areas of the infirmary, especially after visiting the morgue. A little ghost girl named Susie is often reported, and as a male ghost who calls himself Willie. Some believe the apparition of the woman, or one of the female apparitions, is none other than Jane Householder, an elderly lady who was burned to death in the 90s. Okay, so in my research on this stuff, some investigative teams that I've seen on YouTube have a really good communication with the Estes method, listening to a spirit box with headphones on and a blindfold. And yeah. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure you check that out, okay? Most active areas in the old infirmary tend to be the attic, which was both used as an orphanage and as a dungeon, where most of the incorrigible inmates were kept. The third floor women's cell, where those committing minor offenses were held up for 24 hours. And the morgue autopsy area. However, there doesn't seem to be any location within the 4 floors that isn't active, a fact that is attributed to both the amount of tragedy and death that took place here. A spring that runs directly under the building, giving an unending supply of energy, and an odd fact about the cemetery out back that may contribute to those buried there being unable to be at rest. So let me know what you think about this Fairfield County Infirmary, and if you would like to see me investigate there in the future, because this has been something that's fairly close to where I live, that I think I can go there and investigate it. So let me know. So the 7-foot-tall shadow man, let's talk a little bit about him. By some accounts, it's a super tall shadowy being that can grow to 8 or 9 feet, but generally he is clocked in around 7 foot. Now, humans are notoriously bad at estimating size, okay? But there does not seem to be a very consistent flow of people witnessing. Everybody keeps seeing him as 7 foot tall. Much taller than the average person, let's just say that. Firstly, though, let's get into some background on this area. The 4th floor attic space has been used for quite a few things over the years. Before a proper orphanage could be built in the latter of the part of the one whole side was dedicated to housing the children of the poor farm. In later years, the attic was then transient that could rent the space and stay by working in the fields. More disturbingly, though, is the fact that the attic was where the dungeon was located. The dungeon was an area where the most incorrectable inmates were held. They were chained to the wall and for an intermediate time, like 24 hours. And if you were sent to the attic for a punishment, there's also a small section of the attic that is now called the chicken coop, donated by a space with a chicken wire door that is mostly the mentally ill patients were said to have been kept. With that sort of history, it's easy to see how this area could gain a haunting reputation. So, let me know what you think about the 7-foot-tall shadow man in the comments section below. So, yeah. Okay, so here's a little article I'm going to put here. Toppy Parrott was considered rather tall for his time, And there are plenty of other inmates of the infirmary who passed away, but some of which who would be inevitable to make that transition after spending a significant amount of time in the attic. Okay, let's see. The articles are kind of hard to read because they're small. One gentleman who attempted to take his own life in that space was Seward Wagner. Wagner climbed out the skylight and jumped off the roof, injuring himself. He passed shortly after. But why would Wagner or any other potential ghost show up so tall? So I found an interesting explanation. So the attic isn't exactly one of the consistent floor level, especially the ground cupola area where the shadow person only looks like it's taller. So standing on the floor that is 18 inches taller than the surrounding area. So it's like an optical illusion from how the infirmary is set up from where the attic area of where this tall person is seen. So you let me know in the comments. All right, let's read another one. So we talked about the shadow man, the 7-foot tall shadow man, and Jane Householder, who accidentally caught herself on fire. So let's talk about the plane crash at Fairfield County Infirmary. Okay, so if you are a resident or inmate, as they were called, I don't know why they call them inmates, but that's what they called them, of the Fairfield County Infirmary, chances are you probably witnessed some weird stuff. Ghosts have stories to tell, right? On Thursday, October 5th, 1950, a Cessna plane owned by Baker Aviation Corp was being piloted by 23-year-old Robert Broxley of Caledonia. The only passenger aboard a small aircraft was a 22-year-old medical technician working at Marion City Hospital named Barbara Ann Beck. According to the pilot's parents, Broxley became lost when he couldn't find the local airport. The reason he couldn't find the local airport was that there are absolutely no lights on at all, indicating that there was a runway. After trying to find the airport for some time, the plane ran out of gas and Brecklesby crashed the plane in a hard forced landing in a field across from the Fairfield County Infirmary. The plane was returning to Marion from Detroit, and unfortunately Barbara was injured in the landing, suffering a broken vertebrae. She was treated in a local hospital until October 21st and released to her parents' care. Luckily, the accident was not as bad as it could have been, but, I could imagine what was going through the minds of the people at the Fairfield County Infirmary when a plane came falling out of the sky. The infirmary records compiled and published by the Fairfield County of the Ohio Genealogical Society. There was a man named C.H. Jenry who was admitted to the infirmary under the care of Dr. J.M. Borals. Dr. Borals kept a journal of the patient notes between 1855 and 1886. These notes were actually very sparse, but there's an interesting entry for Mr. Jenry. It seems that Mr. Jenry was often referred to as Mr. Nuisance. I'm guessing he's a nuisance because he's always growling on the account of not getting 5 pounds of beef at one meal. He says that he cannot live unless he gets about the amount stated. He wants 5 pounds of meat at a meal. And he gets mad about it. We could not allow that amount, and then he was discharged on August 27, 1886. It is not noted whether or not Mr. Jenry was just a hungry boy, or if he had some legitimate reason for wanting to eat so much meat in sitting. Did he think he was a werewolf? Did he suffer from low iron or something? So it's definitely a weird thing, but it's odd that they just let him go. That's odd to me that they just let him go. So there's the growling man. Let's see. Dolph Griggs. Let's see what Dolph Griggs is. On June 20th, 1955, the local rescue squad was dispatched to the Fairfield County Infirmary. There they found 72-year-old Dolph with a 2.5-inch cut across his throat. Dolph was either unable or unwilling to tell anyone what had happened, so first aid was administered and he was taken to the hospital for further treatment. Luckily, the wounds were not serious and Dolph was released a few days later. There was never a public explanation for what happened to Dolph. We can only speculate. It's possible it was just an accident. Perhaps he cut himself shaving, but it's also possible he was attacked. It wasn't an inmate on inmate. That wasn't unheard of. However, some people think Dolph may have tried to take his own life. Dolph was originally from the area but for several years he had been living with his wife near Houston, Texas, and she was ill for about 2 years before passing away in the Houston hospital. The Lancaster newspaper ran her obituary on June 6, 1959. It stated that she was being brought home to Fairfield County for burial, and he just went to the poorhouse after that. So 2 weeks after the burial, was in the Fairfield County Infirmary and being taken to the hospital for a mysterious wound. Dolph, accompanying his wife home, found himself either too ill to return to Texas or with no reason to go back. Death would finally come for Dolph. He died on April 1st, 1962 at the Fairfield County Infirmary. His body was interred next to his wife at Maple Grove Cemetery in Baltimore, Ohio. What's sad is that there's a tombstone marking of a couple of graves, but there was no one around to make sure the dates of the deaths were ever filled out, which I think is weird. So we're going to put Dolph and his wife's headstone here. Okay, one last ghost story, and then we're going to do the listener submitted story. Let's dive into more about the superintendent. This is a Fairfield County story. Let me get a little bit more comfortable before. Okay, so there are several stories that are told to every visitor investigating the Fairfield County Infirmary in Lancaster, Ohio. It's not Lancaster, it's Lancaster. One of those stories is of a superintendent by the name of Hummel, who was a cruel and abusive overseer of the institution. A shocking claim is that people going past the infirmary would see Hummel out on the farm, beating inmates without mercy. They reasoned if he's going to do that out in the open where the public could see, what the heck is he going to do behind closed doors to these poor unfortunate souls? Further stories and tales of gross neglect in addition to the abuse, many believe that Hummel was outed from his position of the superintendent while the citizens of Fairfield County finally have had enough and requested a formal investigation. To back up these claims, an incident is cited where an abused inmate had finally had enough and brutally attacked Hummel out in the fields one day. I mean, he had it coming, didn't he? Nearly ending his life, and despite being gone from the institution for so many years, the ghost of Hummel has returned, and his name has been popping up on spirit boxes, and affirmative responses have been given when communicating with spirits about their thoughts on this cruel superintendent. So one group has had a definite feeling that there was some darker and more oppressive forces on site, possibly hindering the communication with other spirits. So how much of it is true? Henry Matthew Hummel was born on November 10th, 1873, to the parents of Lewis and Sophie of Lancaster County, where he would live out his entire life. Hummel was a devoted Lutheran and a member of the several civic organizations. He married his wife, Minnie Watts, on September 4th, 1899, and the couple had 5 children together. As their children began to get older and leave home, Hummel and his wife started exploring new opportunities. They took the civil servants test. It's like kind of like a government workers today take. It's like a little test. Both passed with high scores. As a result, Henry was appointed to the position of superintendent of the Fairfield County Infirmary in 1917, with Minnie joining him as his matron. But all was not well for the superintendent Hummel, despite the fact that the local paper was constantly running articles on him for his outstanding management of the county farm. And his work with bringing community charity into the infirmary were those who disliked him. So, on November 20th, 1819, Hummel received a letter from 2 members of the county commission, President Ben Frazier and Mr. E.B. McCullough. The 3rd member, Amos Hoffer, was against the complaints, stating that Mr. Hummel will be removed from his post effective at 9 a.m. on November 25th. The letter listed 3 reasons. 1. In the summer of 1918, inmate George Smith was noted to have maggots in his foot. 2. The summer of 1918, John Switzer died without proper care. And 3. The farm lost too many calves in last season. The letter listed that the temporary superintendent as George Beefree, a young man from the community involved in the grocery business. So obviously, Hummel filed an injunction right away, and the court agreed. Hummel claimed that not only were these allegations vague, but he was not given proper time to defend himself against them. He maintained that he had never been neglectful of his duties in any way, that the two commissioners had been opposed in his opponent from the start, and had effectively been conspiring to have him removed ever since. Oddly enough, both Fraser and McClellow admitted that they had never actually seen anything supporting these claims, but that they were admitted by Hummel himself in his reports that they had heard complaints again. Hoffner maintained that he had never heard any complaints. So, as part of the investigation, a special commission was sent unannounced to the infirmary for a surprise inspection. This delegation was greeted warmly and welcomed into the facility. They noted that neither Hummel or his wife ran off to coach inmates or hide any evidence of wrongdoing. Instead, they were given full access to the building to roam unchaperoned, interviewing as many inmates as they wished. The group noted that every inmate they talked to loved Hummel, and they claimed that he had always treated them with the utmost attention and dignity. They said they were the kindest and most hardworking, and even suggested the county hire a nurse to elevate some of the burden on Mrs. Hummel, who did her job without a complaint at all hours, day or night. Two little old ladies said they would leave if Hummel was forced to leave, despite not having anywhere to go. Another elderly woman said that the man with the maggots in his feet was crazy, and that they would rip off his own bandages faster than they could be put on, cursing and swearing the whole time. Anyone interviewed was quite agitated at the idea of losing their beloved overseers. The board decided to petition in favor of Hummel, finding no evidence of neglect. At the same time, taxpayers of the county were also signing a petition to keep Hummel at the infirmary. Playing devil's advocate, it is possible that someone on the board gave Hummel a heads up about the surprise inspection. It's possible that the worst of the worst inmates were somehow silenced, or a biased group of the chosen to focus on the positive. Okay? Whatever the scenario, the court was unable to substantiate any reason to fire him, and he remained at his post until his death. Henry Hummel passed away at his residence at the Fairfield County Infirmary on February 20th, 1927, after a 5-month illness. He had served the institution faithfully for a decade, and immediately upon his death, his son Lloyd was named intern superintendent, with Minnie as matron still, until a replacement could be found. He was buried at the mausoleum at a nearby Forest Row Cemetery. So where do you think all these stories about Hummel being horrible, abusive overseer came from, okay? I think that they stem from a combination of two things. One, the brutal attack of Hummel by the inmate, and two, charges filed against another superintendent. Okay? I got an article here. I'll pop it here, but, they're kind of hard to see because they're old articles, but, there you go. Okay, so the attack happened on 1924. So remember, he died in 1927. So the attack was July 29th, 1924. Hummel and one of the infirmary inmates were entering the hay field across the street. All of a sudden, the inmate rushed towards him and whacked him over the head with a 3-foot iron bar he used to stack the hay. The first blow broke Hummel's hat and stunned him, allowing the inmate to get in a second blow, causing a large laceration. Frenzied by the sight of blood, the inmate just kept going, while Hummel, now fighting for his life, began to grapple with the man. Hummel was able to grab the wrench out of the man's pocket and hit him with it, causing the man to stop and take off running. But by this time, others had seen what was going on and grabbed the crazy guy. So the article in the Lancaster Eagle Gazette stated that they nearly beat a man to death, but Hummel intervened. Both were taken to the infirmary and given medical treatment, and both thankfully survived the encounter. Although the name of the inmate wasn't ever given, he was said to be a 36-year-old man who had been at the infirmary for the last 16 years. 16 years. Wow. Days prior to the attack, other inmates claimed that the man was walking around muttering, "I'm bloodthirsty. I need to kill somebody." And interesting side note to this story is that obviously the public was upset that something like this could happen, and brought up the discussion of whether or not insane inmates should be housed with what was mostly elderly, okay? The infirm population at the county infirmary. And what we see after this event is an increase in inmates from the infirmary being brought up on lunacy charges and transferred to the asylum in Athens. So there you go. That's the story of what happened to the superintendent. So let me know if you like these ghost stories and what you think about the Fairfield County Infirmary. I, for one, think that they shouldn't have mixed the criminally insane with the elderly and the kids. You know, it was all too mixed. And it was just a stir pot for bad things to happen eventually. So there's a lot of ghost stories here. And I hope that one day I can make it out there myself and check it out. Yeah. So this is a story by JB. This is a personal experience that me and my family had in a hotel in Ohio. I was 5 years old at the time when we first arrived at the hotel, and it seemed nice. It had a giant hallway, a large staircase, decent rooms, as well as an indoor pool. I believe it was sometime in the afternoon when we were just sitting in our room. Suddenly we heard the laughs and gigglings of two girls. It sounded like they were out in the hallway. My mom, thinking that they had must be headed to the pool, said that we should go out and swim so I could have someone to play with. When we left our room, there was no sign of anyone besides us at the hotel. A little confused, we went back to our room. The next day we were checking out, getting ready to leave. My mom said to the lady at the desk, "The little girls upstairs were running through the halls all night long." The lady just looked at her and said, "Ma'am, there's no one else in the rooms upstairs." After that, we were even more confused and didn't know what to think. We clearly heard them as if they had been inches away from our door. My aunt did work there for some time, so after we left, we immediately told her our odd story. She seemed pretty surprised and then asked, "Oh, you don't know about the stories of the hotel? There were rumored to be two little girls who had passed away in a fire at the hotel years ago. And there were many people that said they could hear the laughter of them still in the halls." After that, we were all completely freaked out. Apparently, the hotel was rumored to be haunted, of course. We didn't have any idea the entire time we were there. This may seem like a pretty cliche story, but it happened to me and I found it very creepy, and it's something I will definitely never forget because it has stuck with me all this time. And I know now that there is something at that hotel. We definitely never went back after that. P.S. I'm sorry this was so short. These are all the details that I remember that happened. But thank you for taking your time to read it. Love your podcast. Seriously, sincerely, JB. Well, thanks, JB. I think it was just perfect. Just perfect. All right, guys. If you want me to read your story on my podcast, please submit your story to underthemoonparapod@gmail.com, and I will read your story on the show. So, I'm another year older, another year wiser. It's my last year in my 30s. Don't know how I feel about it, but hey, I have a really cool cat to spend the rest of my life with because he turned 1 today, and his name is Ollie, and he is my sunshine. All right, guys. So, until next time, stay spooky.